That's right, and a big win for Hillary Clinton in Ohio, but again, as we talked about earlier, not a huge surprise here. Jesse Mermel, what does this mean for Hillary Clinton?
Well, it's not a huge surprise if you believe the polls, but after Michigan, not all of us were believing the polls. So it is a big win, one that was predicted, but with a fair amount of skepticism from those of us observing things. And I think that the Bernie Sanders camp was really hoping that they could come into tonight and prove that Michigan wasn't the fluke that some people thought it was. And Hillary didn't just win. It looks like she's going to win something like 66-33. I mean, it is a massive win in Ohio, a massive win in Florida. We'll see what happens in Illinois and Missouri, but I'm guessing that Ohio is Hillary Clinton's new favorite state.
Yeah, and Illinois, North Carolina, Illinois and Missouri are two states that Bernie Sanders maybe was considered to have a slightly better chance at than
Absolutely.
Ohio.
Missouri, Illinois, and Ohio were the three that folks thought he could make a dent in. Looks like Ohio is clearly off that list, and we'll see Illinois and Missouri still to come. But in terms of delegate count, Ohio and Florida were the two big nuggets, and Hillary has taken them by extremely wide margins.
Okay, and Jeff, does this have any bearing on the Republican side at all? Does this send any signal as far as you're concerned?
In my opinion, I think she locked it up tonight. There's really no path forward for Bernie to conceivably other than to just keep his message out there, to keep running, and which he should if he and his supporters feel that strongly about it. But really the delegate math on the Democratic side is going to go one way, and it's going to go towards Hillary Clinton. She can, even if the remainder of the states are proportional in the respect they were tonight, it's going to be virtually impossible for Bernie Sanders to get the nomination. So now what the folks on the Republican side can decide to do is maybe go after Clinton a little bit more publicly, but that remains to be seen if they can sort it out amongst themselves. So right now we have a three-man race between Kasich, Cruz, and Trump, but I think you're going to see the tone about stay the same as those three individuals continue to go after each other, trying to make their way to the convention.
Yeah, you know, Jesse, doesn't this create a scenario for Bernie Sanders, though, where he is constantly being asked or told, you know, Senator Sanders, what's your path to victory? How are you going to pull this off?
We've already seen that a little bit as Hillary Clinton's delegate count gap has become more and more significant. I think that drumbeat will get louder, but I do want to point out that it looks like tonight we may be able to say that we are definitively on a path to having a woman nominee of a major party for the first time ever. And I know that's not the reason folks will vote for her, but it is historic and an important piece of symbolism and something that's worth noting. That's a big step toward that tonight.
About the pressure here for a second, because you know there have been a fair amount of debates where it's gotten relatively testy on the Democrat side, not nearly so on the Republican side, but if the party is in agreement that this is basically wrapped up, the Democratic Party is in agreement, there's a strong case to be made that from some folks who would say Bernie should drop out because Clinton will continue to take a lot of flack from the Sanders people, and it might be, will those wounds heal in enough time to get those former Sanders supporters to come out in the general election? Probably. I mean, you know, the Democratic Party is a little bit better at coming behind their nominee than necessarily the Republicans are. But if this race continues and there's this divisiveness over Wall Street, if there's this divisiveness over establishment and money, and you see that narrative take place that we've seen over the past few weeks and months, that could actually serve to go against Hillary Clinton. And I'm curious to see in the next few weeks if you'll hear those calls for Bernie to get out, if they'll become louder and louder.
Because Bernie Sanders supporters are voters. I mean, you see these people out there. These are the folks that go to the polls. And so Hillary Clinton, especially in the general election, she needs those folks to not just say, well, you know, I guess I'm with Hillary. She needs them to say, we want to win for Hillary.
Absolutely, and I think it's part of why you saw about 5 incredibly high-profile progressive organizations come out and say that the Democratic Party and the progressive movement needs to unify against Donald Trump, no matter who the nominee is. These were organizations like Move On, that's with Bernie, labor groups who are with Hillary. It ran the gamut. It wasn't candidate-based, and it was an ideological statement that no matter who our nominee is, we already need to be focused on organizing against Donald Trump, assuming he's the Republican nominee. So I think that unification groundwork is already happening, even outside of the two candidate camps.
You know, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders have had their definite differences and have gotten pretty heated in some of these debates. Maybe nothing like what's happened on the Republican stage, But I wonder if, after tonight, we will see the Clinton folks try to meet with Bernie Sanders and possibly hammer out what he wants,
They're gonna have to really determine what Bernie Sanders wants out of this, because I don't think he'll go away quietly. He's earned enough political capital where he can have a major stake in this race and throw a monkey wrench into it if he decides to. But now that the writing's on the wall, I would guess that he's a team player for the general election. But I think those conversations are going to, if they're not taking place already, they're going to start in the morning.
And Jeff, while we're on you here, I want to let you both know right now that John Kasich has just won Ohio.
Well, there you
So
go.
this is obviously a really
That's
big win for him, and it sounds like it is not going to be winning by a squeaker. It sounds like he's getting a solid win tonight over Donald Trump. And Jeff, I want to know your gut reaction to just what this means.
Good night for the folks who want to stop Trump. This Never Trump movement or anti-Trump movement. John Kasich, it was predicted. We don't have the exact numbers yet, but it was a squeaker in the polls. But if he comes out with at least a 5% lead, that's a nice solid victory, and it ensures that he'll stick around for a significant amount of time. I actually don't see him winning any other states. He's still way behind in the delegate count, but he's going to try to earn, again, more political capital as we progress towards the convention. What will be curious is these upcoming races, if he's got a real shot at some of the proportional contests and what Ted Cruz does in some of the winner-take-all contests in relation to John Kasich, because there's a significant amount of delegates that are up for grabs, that Ted Cruz one-on-one can beat Donald Trump. But if Kasich is in the mix there, what does that do to the numbers? And it might be enough to swing an election for Trump.
And everything is relative, as you point out, what other states he's going to win. But I wonder if there's a scenario for John Kasich where he has this pretty big win tonight over Donald Trump. Marco Rubio's out of the race now. Is there any chance of getting the momentum to swing his way in the anybody but Trump crowd?
Doubtful.
You think they're more going to head toward Ted Cruz?
Yeah, I think from everything we've seen so far, John Kasich, this is his one and only win, and it probably will be his only
Although,
win.
would you not argue that Kasich would be the most formidable candidate up
Without
against
question.
Hillary Clinton?
Polling backs that up.
And this is what I don't understand sometimes with the Republican Party.
Well, you're making the mistake of applying logic to what's happening in the
Now, the
Republican Party.
Democrats have some interesting
We
scenarios. here, too.
absolutely do. I mean, speaking for myself, Kasich, of the three of them, is the one I'm most nervous about as a Democrat, regardless of who we would face. We were talking about this earlier, his politics in Ohio are quite conservative. His politics are very far right, but he carries himself as a moderate. His temperament is moderate. He's approachable, he's accessible. I think he would be a much, I don't know if he'd be tougher to run against than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is just so unpredictable, but he would make it very, very challenging for any Democrat. I think he is beatable, but I think he is tough, and it is, I agree with you, it is surprising that the Republican electorate isn't seeing that and is just now starting to give him the win.
So you're perfectly happy to see John Kasich step out of this at some point down the road?
Certainly, I don't take Donald Trump for granted by any stretch of the imagination. I think he would be a formidable opponent and has clearly proven that he can build quite the movement behind him. But I think that Kasich would be almost a stealth challenge.
Yeah, Jeff, do you agree with that assessment?
If you go by the polling and actually any of the initial general election matchups, Kasich does very well, just about as well as Marco Rubio did. So yes, that's about the strongest argument you have for a Kasich candidacy. However, the polling in the general election doesn't get you past the primary. He's actually got to do well in these states. And Ted Cruz has had the best operation on the ground, has run the best campaign. Donald Trump is a phenomenon of media, culture, and celebrity. So he had that name recognition going into all this, didn't care what anybody thought about what he said, and was able to just create this whirlwind around himself that we're still talking about him no matter what. So those are tough odds. Those are long odds against John Kasich, and I personally don't see how he wins another state. Possibly New York, only because it's a closed primary. He'll do better in the closed primary states. But again, we get down to proportional versus winner take all. The winner take all states, I don't see him coming out on top of that. He has virtually no mathematical path to a majority of delegates. But
Has he not been attractive to the party because he's not seen as charismatic, as bold enough, as too moderate? What hasn't he caught
well,
on?
you got to remember where we started. We started in a field of 17 candidates. 17 candidates, and so there was
But
just
we've
not
got
enough
three now.
bandwidth. Well,
Okay.
yeah, we've not enough bandwidth. And he hung around, and he just kind of hung around and hung around and hung around, and never took on Trump directly. In the past day or two, he's ventured to do that. He's never really gone after any of the other candidates. He's just kind of stayed back and done his quiet demeanor persona, and it's worked well for him. It's gotten him to this point. It's gotten him to this point in the race. But going past that, it's going to be a very tough lift for him to leapfrog Ted Cruz or Donald Trump to actually start winning significant delegates amount and going into the convention with a strong case.
Okay, well, we're coming up on 9 o'clock. We should be hearing from Donald Trump shortly if he's on time, which, let's face it, that doesn't always happen on these nights. But I'm going to toss it back to Christy and Chris right now because we've got a lot more coming up ahead.